The Portuguese in India. Let's talk about a part of the Age of Discovery you might not know. The resources I'm relying on to help me tell this story are the book Conquerors, How Portugal Forged the First Global Empire by Roger Crowley, an interview with the author, and the Fordham University website, which has the text of the chronicler on da Gama's ship, one of the resources Crowley relied on to write the book. I'm pretty confident that this is an unfamiliar story because according to the author, many of the resources he used were never translated from the original Portuguese, which means no one outside of Portugal had studied them. What we do know is that the Portuguese were seafarers. Look at the map. The westernmost point of continental Europe is Sintra, right there, which is important. Ah, Sintra. This is where Prince Henry the Navigator sponsored exploration. We know that Bartholomew Dias rounded the southern tip of Africa in 1488, Columbus sailed to the Americas in 1492, and Vasco da Gama found a new route to India in 1498. I'd long been curious about Prince Henry the Navigator, who sponsored the curiosities that led to the Age of Discovery and died in 1460. When I started reading the book, I was glad I didn't know this dark side of the story before I traveled to Portugal. Da Gama's voyage, compared to Columbus's 5 years earlier, was more impressive in several ways. While Columbus took 71 days to sail the 4,000 miles to the Bahamas, it took da Gama 309 days to sail 12,000 miles from Lisbon to Calicut in India. Both voyages would change global history, but in terms of bravery, endurance, and sheer bloody-mindedness, da Gama's voyage makes Columbus's look comparatively easy. I was very quickly shocked to read about the cruelty of the Europeans in their encounters with the people of India and Southeast Asia. We all know how Columbus has fallen out of favor because of the blatant disregard he and the conquistadors had for the cultures they destroyed. You decide if this is similar or different. The Portuguese had the attitude of Crusaders. Crowley actually begins the book telling about a campaign on the northern coast of Africa in 1414. The Portuguese troops are made up of young nobles who are bored and itching to use their fighting skills. In Arab Muslim-held Morocco, they encounter art, technologies, and luxuries that astound them. Not only were they from a relatively poor European nation at the end of the Dark Ages, like the Spanish, the Portuguese had never gone on crusade to the Middle East, like the Knights in the rest of Europe. They'd never seen anything like this. It was so very different from their world, such beauty, even though they destroyed much of it. This whet their appetites for more. For Manuel, King of Portugal, the Indian Ocean was crusading territory, where he intended to convert the heathens, establish an Eastern Empire in the name of Christ, join forces with the legendary Christian king of Africa, Prester John, eliminate the Muslims and their thriving trade empire, and take it for himself. This is the attitude with which Vasco da Gama sets out. This mindset makes him a terrible diplomat. He's highly distrustful and disrespectful of the rulers he needs to work with, and often ends up relying on his cannons to stave off attacks while the Portuguese make a quick retreat in their ships. Their default strategies, the book says, were suspicion, aggressive hostage-taking, the half-drawn sword, and a simply binary choice between Christian and Muslim. The Indian Ocean had been open to everyone. Yes, ships had to deal with pirates. They paid them a tribute and were allowed to go. In 1502, da Gama's ship happened upon a ship full of passengers, men, women, and children, returning from the Hajj to Mecca. He forces them to stop. They offer the usual tribute. It's refused. They're very wealthy and offer more, to the point of finally everything on the ship. But da Gama decides to burn the whole ship with everything and everyone in it, all the riches and all the people, just because they were Muslim. Because of rumors they'd heard of a legendary Christian king in Africa who they called Prester John, they expected the Indian Ocean to be surrounded by Christians. Certainly there had been Christians in Ethiopia since the 1st century, but Christians anywhere in those parts of the world were scant. No, the Indian Ocean trade was under Muslim control. For more than 60 years, thanks to Prince Henry's sponsorship, Portugal had been working its way along the western coast of Africa, gathering information, improving ships, technology, and navigational tools, making connections, and learning languages. Like the first astronauts in my generation, they had to overcome their fear of the unknown. But immense preparation and problem solving, trial and error, and countless little discoveries went into the effort to prepare for this voyage to discover a new route to India. They're so smart that it's kind of funny. When they get to India, the chronicler writes, "The city of Calicut is inhabited by Christians." Like anyone who isn't a Muslim is obviously a Christian. It took years before they figured out Hinduism was another religion. When they're taken to meet the king, they pass a church, and the chronicler writes, "Many saints were painted on the walls of the church, wearing crowns. They were painted variously with teeth protruding an inch from the mouth and 4 or 5 arms." When they got to the king, they prepared to present their gift: 12 pieces of cloth, 4 scarlet hoods, 6 hats, 4 strings of coral, 6 bowls, a case of sugar, and 2 casks of oil, and 2 of honey. The chronicler writes, "When the king's servants saw the presents, they laughed at it, saying that it was not a thing to offer to a king, that the poorest merchant from Mecca or any other part of India gave more, and that if he wanted to make a present, it should be gold." Da Gama had to quickly explain that he wasn't a merchant, he was an ambassador, and that the ships to follow would bring great gifts. Da Gama and his crew are eventually permitted to trade their few items in the market. They're caught in the seasonal monsoons and barely make it back to Portugal, but because of cutting out the Arab middleman, the small amount of cargo they were able to bring back makes them a 300% profit. Portugal sends a second expedition, which also behaves very badly in the region, attacking Arab shipping in the Indian Ocean. They leave behind some men in a factory or trading station that they establish. These men are all killed in revenge for the attacks. Who do you think they send to get the vengeance? Vasco da Gama. In 1502, he returns and destroys Calicut. The Portuguese actually have trouble getting enough sailors for the expeditions. They literally take men out of prisons and force them to man the ship. If successful, the voyages are very profitable, but they were also very long and dangerous. Many did not return. By 1505, King Manuel understood that they would have to control the Indian Ocean spice trade by seizing and holding a few strategic points. Albuquerque commanded the 5th Armada and spent 9 years as governor of India. He was no better than da Gama as far as cruelty. At Goa, which he took without orders because it was strategic, Albuquerque killed so many people that the city's infamous crocodiles could not eat them all. Albuquerque practiced the intimidatory tactics that had made the Franks, which the people of India called them, so feared along the coast of India. Passing vessels were captured and ransacked for provisions. The unfortunate crews had their hands, noses, and ears cut off and were put ashore to announce the terror and majesty of Portugal. The ships were then burned. Unlike the Spanish conquistadors, who were pretty much privateers, Portugal approached this as a kind of national project, with everyone working for the king. They really didn't develop a merchant class. They were no better at finances than the Spanish, and like the Spanish, the wealth really slipped through their fingers. Your book tells you that Portugal did not have the resources to colonize the region. Portugal is twice the size of the Netherlands and much closer to India. But in the end, the Dutch, who learned from everything the Portuguese had done and became experts at everything the Portuguese lacked, took over the India spice trade. So to recap, as you saw in the timeline activity, the rise and fall of the Portuguese trade empire was significant but short. They were super smart and figured out how to start their own trade with India, sidestepping the Arab middleman and raking in a bundle in the spice trade. But they were super dumb and lost it all to the Dutch. But it serves them right for being so evil and mean and destructive to the people of India and Southeast Asia, who provided all the spices Europe loved and wanted so much. Diaz and da Gama will always be remembered for their voyages of discovery, which are part of this period in history that changed the world. King Manuel did spend a lot of the wealth from the spice trade, and Lisbon is a beautiful city, but that's a subject for another video.